Assalamu alaikum, let's explore this Islamic topic together. Hey, so, you know how we were talking about powerful women in history? Well, let me tell you about something absolutely fascinating. The women sultanas and their courtly culture in medieval Muslim Spain. It's a seriously underappreciated piece of Islamic history. And honestly, blows a lot of common perceptions out of the water. Think about it. We often hear about the patriarchal nature of certain cultures and religions. And while there are definitely elements of that throughout history everywhere, Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus as it was called, was a surprisingly different story, especially when it comes to women's influence. This isn't to say it was a utopia, of course, but the role women played, particularly within the royal court, was far more significant than many realize. The thing is, Al-Andalus wasn't just some far-off, isolated kingdom. It was a vibrant, sophisticated civilization at the crossroads of three continents, Africa, Europe, and Asia. Imagine a melting pot of cultures, languages, and ideas, with a flourishing intellectual scene. Think gorgeous palaces, incredible libraries filled with ancient stunning architecture. It was a place where art, science, and philosophy thrived. And guess what? Women were intricately involved in all of it. Now, the power of sultanas wasn't always the same. Sometimes they ruled directly, wielding ultimate authority. Other times, their influence was exerted subtly, through their counsel and patronage. But even then, that influence was incredibly powerful. Think of it like this. The Sultan, the king, might have been the official head of state. But the Sultana's opinions, her connections, her wisdom, that could sway decisions, shape policy, even influence international affairs. Their education was a huge part of this. Unlike many places in Europe at the same time, women in Al-Andalus often received excellent educations, mastering not just the arts but also things like literature, mathematics, astronomy, you name it. They were educated in the same rigorous tradition as men, sometimes even exceeding them in certain fields. This wasn't just a nice to have. It was essential for navigating the complex political landscape and influencing the court. The court itself was a center of cultural activity. It wasn't just a place for official business. It was a hub for poets, artists, musicians, scholars, a veritable intellectual salon. And women were central to this. They weren't just passive participants. They were patrons of the arts, commissioning works, sponsoring poets, and often excelling in the arts themselves. Think of lavish gatherings, musical performances, even debates on philosophy and theology, all happening within the walls of these palaces, with the sultana as a key player. We're talking about women who weren't confined to harems, though the concept of a harem in Al-Andalus was far more nuanced than many portrayals. While some secluded spaces existed, the sultana's sphere of influence often extended far beyond those walls. They met with ambassadors, advised their husbands, managed finances, even participated in diplomatic negotiations. Their religious life was also important to understanding their role. Islam, in its core tenets, doesn't explicitly restrict women's participation in public life. While interpretations vary across time and place, Al-Andalus saw a more inclusive approach, one which allowed women to participate actively in religious scholarship and intellectual discourse. This wasn't just about piety. It was about wielding religious authority and legitimacy to further their political influence. Imagine the complexities, the constant political maneuvering, the delicate balancing act between religious observance and political ambition, the shrewd negotiations, It's a story brimming with drama and intrigue. It's a story about women who were intelligent, sophisticated, politically savvy, and utterly fascinating. Now, let's not romanticize things too much. Al-Andalus, like any society, had its inequalities. Not all women enjoyed the same privileges as the sultanas. And the realities of life for many women were undoubtedly difficult. However, the story of these powerful women and their courtly culture challenges conventional narratives about women's roles in medieval Islam, highlighting a level of sophistication and influence that's often overlooked. Their story is a reminder that history is far more nuanced and complex than simple generalizations. It's a testament to the remarkable achievements of women who, in a time and place often misunderstood, left an indelible mark on their world. It's a story that deserves to be told, explored, and appreciated for its richness and complexity. Because ultimately, it tells us something important about the resilience and power of women throughout history. It shows us that even within societies that might appear to limit women, there were, and are, always women finding ways to rise, to influence, and to make their voices heard. Hey, so, you know how we were talking about powerful women in history? Well, let's dive into something really fascinating. The women sultanas of medieval Muslim Spain. Al-Andalus. It's a whole world of intrigue, culture, and surprisingly progressive attitudes, especially considering the times. Imagine this. It's the 8th century, and the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula is relatively fresh. The Umayyad Caliphate has established itself. And while the men are busy building empire and fighting wars, something incredibly unique is happening behind the scenes. Women are quietly accumulating power and influence. It wasn't like a sudden revolution, more like a slow, steady rise, a subtle shift in the balance of power. Now, remember, we're talking about a society deeply rooted in Islamic faith, and Islamic law, Sharia, plays a huge role. But Al-Andalus, this corner of the Muslim world in Spain, was different. It was a melting pot, Berbers, Arabs, Jews, and Christians all living together, mostly, creating a vibrant, intellectually stimulating environment. This unique blend significantly shaped the roles and rights of women. It wasn't perfect, of course, but there was a level of fluidity and flexibility that wasn't as readily apparent in other parts of the Muslim world at the time. Think of it, in a society where literacy was prized. Women from wealthy families were often educated. They weren't just learning household skills. They were studying literature, even science and mathematics. This literacy was key, it gave them agency. They could manage their own affairs, conduct business, and even write poetry expressing their perspectives, often challenging societal norms subtly, sometimes overtly. One of the early examples that springs to mind is the role of women within the royal family itself. While the sultans, of course, held supreme power, the women of the court, their mothers, wives, sisters, and daughters, weren't mere decorative figures. They held considerable influence through their relationships with the rulers, and often acted as advisors and patrons of the arts and sciences. Think of them as the power brokers behind the throne, sometimes subtly pulling strings, other times openly involved in political decisions. And it wasn't just their familial connections. Women also held significant economic power. Many were involved in trade, owning businesses, and managing vast estates. We're talking about significant wealth and influence, often independent of their male relatives. This economic independence gave them a certain degree of autonomy and allowed them to navigate social hierarchy with a confidence that's striking. Their courtly culture was just as unique. The palaces were centers of learning and artistic expression. Women played key roles in fostering this vibrant cultural scene. They commissioned artworks, hosted literary gatherings, supported poets and musicians, and even engaged in intellectual debates. Imagine lavishly decorated palaces, filled with the sound of music, the scent of exotic perfumes, and the murmur of intelligent conversation. These weren't just places of residence. They were centers of power and cultural innovation. The clothing and adornment of these women are another fascinating aspect. They were known for their elegant and often extravagant attire, reflecting their wealth and status. Think intricate embroidery, precious jewels, and luxurious fabrics. But their clothing wasn't just a display of wealth. It was also a way of expressing their identity and individuality within the court. Now, it wasn't a utopia. Of course, the social structures of the time still placed limitations on women's lives. But within those limitations, they found ways to carve out spaces of power and influence. Their stories aren't always easily documented, but fragments emerge. In Poe, in legal records, in the accounts of travelers who visited Al-Andalus. These hints reveal a world where women were more than just wives and mothers. They were powerful players in a complex and fascinating society. The legacy of these women sultanas and their courtly culture is significant. It demonstrates that even within patriarchal societies, women found ways to assert their agency and contribute to the intellectual and cultural richness of their time. They challenge our assumptions about the role of women in the medieval world and remind us that history isn't just about kings and emperors, but also about the women who shaped their worlds. It's a history worth exploring, don't you think? Hey, so you know how we were talking about medieval Spain the other day? I was thinking more about the women, specifically the sultanas, and their incredible influence. It's way more than just harem intrigue, trust me. It's a fascinating slice of history, a really rich and complex part of Islamic history that often gets overlooked. Let's dive into the middle chapters. As it were, the thick of it all. Imagine Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain. At its height, a vibrant tapes of cultures, languages, and religions. It wasn't just about conquering. It was a place of astonishing intellectual and artistic flourishing. Think incredible architecture, advancements in medicine and science, and a thriving literary scene, philosophy, you name it. And within this incredible melting pot, the sultanas, the women at the heart of the power structures, held a surprisingly prominent role. Now, it's crucial to understand the Islamic society, even then, was nuanced. While patriarchal structures existed, the Quran itself granted women significant rights and protections not always seen in other contemporary societies. Inheritance rights, the right to divorce, in some cases initiating it, and the ability to own property were all aspects of Islamic law that could, and often did, empower women. This wasn't always perfectly implemented, obviously. Power dynamics played out in different ways, but the legal framework was significantly different from, say, medieval Europe. So, these sultanas weren't just decorative figures. Many were actively involved in governance, diplomacy, and patronage of the arts. Think of them as powerful patrons, shaping the cultural landscape of Al-Andalus. We're not talking about ruling outright in every case, necessarily, but wielding considerable influence behind the scenes and sometimes even directly. They often acted as advisors to their husbands, sons, or other male relatives who held the formal titles of sultan or caliph. Let's picture a typical court scene. Imagine lavish palaces, intricate gardens, the scent of exotic spices hanging in the air. These weren't isolated harems. The Sultana's court was a hub of activity. Scholars, poets, musicians, and even political figures would regularly attend gatherings held by the Sultanas. Think salons, but with far grander scale and political impact. These women were deeply involved in fostering intellectual life, commissioning works of art, and even influencing political decisions through their connections and advice. The Sultanas often wielded their power through patronage. They funded libraries, mosques, hospitals, and other important institutions, leaving a lasting legacy on the physical landscape of Al-Andalus. Their patronage wasn't just about charity. It was a strategic move to bolster their influence and solidify their position within the court and beyond. Think of it as a form of soft power, shaping the cultural narrative and leaving their mark in ways that went beyond political maneuvering. The religious corn also played a significant role. Many sultanas were pious women, actively involved in religious life. They supported religious scholars, funded the construction and maintenance of mosques, and sometimes even played a role in religious education. This wasn't about merely fulfilling religious duties. It was about aligning themselves with religious authority, which in turn reinforced their power and legitimacy. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. The lives of these women were far from simple. Intrigue, political maneuvering, and power struggles were just as present in Al-Andalus as anywhere else. We see evidence of sultanas actively involved in managing their families' political affairs, forming alliances, and even engaging in strategic marriages to strengthen their position. The court was a pressure cooker, a stage for both diplomacy and conflict. Think about the succession crises, the battles for power that often ensued after the death of a sultan. The sultanas, their sons, their daughters, often found themselves caught in the middle of these deadly games of thrones. Their actions could make or break dynasties. Their alliances could lead to peace or war. Now, the we have are often filtered through male perspectives, which inevitably impacts our understanding. We don't have diaries or personal letters from the sultanas themselves in abundance. Yet, through careful analysis of historical chronicles, poems, and architectural records, we can piece together a compelling narrative of their lives and influence. And aren't just about individual women. It's about the collective impact of these sultanas on the society they inhabited. Their influence extended far beyond the confines of the court, shaping social norms, patronizing arts, and contributing to the enduring legacy of Al-Andalus. It's a story of resilience, ingenuity, and the complex ways in which women navigated a world that was both challenging and, in unexpected ways, empowering. It's a powerful reminder that history is far more nuanced than often presented and that narratives of women, even from centuries ago, deserve to be heard and understood. So, what do you think? Isn't this fascinating? So, we've been talking about these incredible women sultanas in medieval Muslim Spain. Right? Al-Andalus, that breathtaking melting pot of cultures. It's amazing to think how influential they were, especially given the societal norms of the time. But how did it all end? Well, it wasn't a sudden crash. More like a slow, sad fading. Remember how we talked about the power these women wielded, not just as figureheads, but as real political players? They weren't just sitting pretty, adorning harems. They were actively involved in governance, diplomacy, and even military strategy. Think of women like Zainab al-Khatun, who was known for her sharp intellect and shrewd political maneuvering. Or how about Maria de Padilla, a fascinating figure who, although not technically a sultana, highlights the complex intertwining of Christian and Muslim cultures. She demonstrates the fluidity of power and influence in the era. Their influence wasn't just about political power, though. Their courts were centers of incredible cultural blossoming. Imagine vibrant palaces filled with scholars, poets, musicians, and artists, a buzzing intellectual and artistic hub. They patronized the arts, commissioned incredible works of literature, architecture, and calligraphy. The style, the refinement, it was considered the epitome of sophistication across the Mediterranean. Think of the exquisite isles, the delicate pottery, the stunning architecture we still marvel at today, all linked to the patronage and taste of these powerful women. Religion played a huge role. Of course, while Islam was the dominant religion, Al-Andalus had a unique blend of faiths. Muslims, Christians, and Jews all lived and interacted, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes not so much. But the women sultanas, in their courts, often created spaces for intellectual exchange that went beyond the usual divides. Their courts were places of learning, where different religious perspectives could, sometimes, be explored and discussed. But as we approach the end of Al-Andalus, the situation gets more complicated. The gradual weakening of the Muslim kingdoms started to chip away at the power of the sultanas. Remember how I mentioned the constant political maneuvering? Well, that increased as the various kingdoms, Cordoba, Seville, Granada, vied for dominance. This internal conflict weakened their position. As outside pressures from the Christian kingdoms in the north intensified, the internal strife made them vulnerable. The Reconquista, the long Christian campaign to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula, gained momentum. This wasn't just about military might. It involved a complex web of political alliances, betrayals, and changing allegiances. The Christian kingdoms, slowly but steadily, chipped away at the Muslim territories. The sultanas, despite their influence, were not immune to these larger political shifts. Their power, once seemingly absolute, became increasingly constrained by the shifting sands of war and diplomacy. As the Muslim kingdoms dwindled, the splendor of their courts began to diminish. The lavish patronage of the arts, the lively intellectual debates, the vibrant cultural exchange, all started to fade. The stability, the sense of security that allowed this extraordinary flourishing, it all began to crumble. The fall of Granada in 1492 marks the symbolic end of Muslim rule in Spain. This wasn't a single battle, it was the culmination of centuries of struggle. The last Sultana, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon's rule marked a new era. The end of an era of Muslim power. It wasn't a dramatic, fiery finale, more of a slow sunset. The legacy of the women sultanas, however, lives on. Their story isn't just about political power, it's about cultural impact. It's about how, even amidst conflict and decline, a unique and breathtaking civilization flourished, thanks in no small part to the vision and influence of these remarkable women. Their lives remind us that power can be wielded in many ways and that even in times of adversity, beauty, intelligence, and creativity can leave a lasting mark on history. We still see their influence in the architecture, literature, and art that survived the passage of time. Their story, while ending with the fall of Al-Andalus, is a testament to the power of women, the resilience of culture, and the enduring legacy of a unique and fascinating period in history. What do you think? It's a pretty incredible story, isn't it? Hey, so, we were talking about the amazing women of medieval Muslim Spain, right? The Sultanas and their whole world. It's fascinating stuff. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What can we learn from them today? First off, it's important to remember that Al-Andalus, that's what Muslim Spain was called, wasn't some monolithic entity. It wasn't all just one big, happy family. Think of it more like a patchwork quilt, with different kingdoms, shifting political landscapes, and a vibrant mix of cultures. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all lived side by side, sometimes peacefully, sometimes less so. This complex tapes is crucial to understanding the role of women in power. And the sultanas, wow. They weren't just figureheads. They wielded real power, often behind the scenes, but sometimes very much out in front. Think about the influence of women in the royal courts. They weren't just pretty faces. They were often advisors, diplomats, patrons of the arts, and even military strategists. We see this reflected in their patronage of architecture, literature, and the sciences. Imagine a woman commissioning the building of a magnificent mosque, or supporting a scholar writing groundbreaking works on medicine or mathematics. That's the kind of power we're talking about. One of the things that strikes me is the sheer diversity of their experiences. Some sultanas came from royal families. Others were wives who rose to prominence through sheer intelligence and cunning. Some ruled in their own right, while others exerted influence through their sons or husbands. It wasn't a uniform experience. And their stories show us the many different ways women could navigate power in a patriarchal society. Now, let's talk religion. Islam itself, in its foundational essence, doesn't diminish the importance of women. The Quran speaks of the importance of justice and fairness. And while interpretations have varied throughout history, there are many examples of powerful women in early Islamic history who held positions of authority. The Corn of Al-Andalus, however, is unique. It was a time and place where Islamic scholarship flourished, leading to various interpretations of religious and societal norms. And this diverse interpretation, in some instances, allowed for greater autonomy for women in the public sphere. But it's not a simple story of female empowerment without caveats. Even in Al-Andalus, the societal norms of the time meant limitations existed. Women's lives were still largely defined by family structures and patriarchal expectations. Their power was often subtly exerted, negotiated, or carefully crafted. It wasn't a world of complete equality, far from it. But the very existence of powerful sultanas shows that women could, and did, find ways to challenge and reshape the norms of the day. So, what does all this mean for us today? I think there are a few key takeaways. Firstly, it reminds us of the incredible resilience and agency of women throughout history. Even in the face of adversity and societal limitations, women found ways to make their mark and leave their legacy. Their stories are a powerful antidote to the idea that women have always been powerless or passive. Secondly, it highlights the importance of understanding Quran. We can't simply apply modern frameworks to understand the past. We need to understand the social, political, and religious climate in which these women lived to truly appreciate their achievements and the challenges they faced. Judging them by today's standards is unfair and misses the nuance of their historical Quran. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, their stories challenge us to question our own assumptions about power and gender. The diverse experiences of the Sultanas of Al-Andalus demonstrate that there isn't one single way to be a powerful woman, and that power itself can take many forms. Their legacies show us that women can hold positions of influence and leadership within religious and cultural frameworks, often by working within systems, but also sometimes by gently, or sometimes forcefully, pushing against them. Finally, the story of these women encourages a more nuanced understanding of Islamic history. It challenges the sometimes simplified narratives that overlook the crucial roles women played in shaping societies and cultures. Their stories enrich our understanding of Islam itself, reminding us that it's not a monolithic religion but a diverse and dynamic faith with a rich tapes of interpretations and experiences throughout its history. So, reflecting on these extraordinary women, their strength, their intelligence, their struggles, and their triumphs, it's a powerful lesson in history, leadership, and the enduring human capacity for resilience and change. It's a story that deserves to be told and retold, not just for Muslims, but for everyone. It's a story that challenges us to be better, to strive for more, and to remember that the past can hold invaluable lessons for navigating the complexities of the present. Goodbye, may Allah bless us all. That's our discussion for today.